The mutiny on the Potemkin. In 1905, sailors from the Russian battleship Potemkin mutinied over an argument about lousy food. However, the events quickly escalated to the point that the revolutionaries took control of the ship and sailed to the port of Odessa, where they fought Russian army soldiers and threatened to bomb the town with artillery. A decade before the outbreak of World War I, civilian unrest was slowly growing in the vastness of the land of the Tsars. In 1904, the empire went to war with Japan over influence in the region, and months later, the Russian Navy suffered a humiliating defeat at the Strait of Tsushima. In just 2 days, over 10,000 Russians were either captured or lost, and the nation's morale took a heavy toll, especially among the Navy. Then, after the working-class uprising on January 22, 1905, the rookie sailors of the Potemkin warship revolted when they were given food riddled with maggots. The 700 crewmen chose Vakolenchuk, a revolutionary mariner, as their spokesman. The leader went to the commander to have a word, but things quickly went sideways and a shooting broke out. Vakolenchuk then rushed to the armory, equipped 30 sailors, and began shooting the ship's officers. 7 of the 18 officers on board were finished off, including the captain, and the rest were locked up in a cabin. The 700 sailors then took command of the ship under a committee of 25 men. Potemkin then set sail for Odessa to join the revolution on shore, and around 10 p.m., they arrived at the city, but refused to land until other sailors from the Black Sea Fleet joined them. Finally, on June 29th, the sailors went ashore to protest for the abolition of the monarchy. The crowd cheered, and the violent confrontation started. With the help of the police, the army tried to impose order, and Potemkin then fired some shots at them from the dock. The entire Black Sea Fleet was soon mobilized to crush the mutineers, but the crews refused to shoot down fellow sailors. The Potemkin's crew then managed to survive at sea for 11 days before surrendering to Romania. Most of the crew stayed in exile, and the few who dared step onto Russian soil were swiftly executed. The mutiny is well known to have served as an inspiration for the Russian Revolution in 1917. The Salerno Mutiny. In September of 1943, over 200 sailors from General Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army put down their rifles and refused to take part in the battle for Salerno in the south of Italy. It became the most significant wartime mutiny in British military history, and although the men were court-martialed, they were not sentenced to death, but saw their war pensions reduced and lost all the medals they had earned in combat. The hardened veterans of the war in North Africa, who took part in the mutiny against Erwin Rommel, refused to fight because they were promised to be returned to their former units, but instead were sent to fight among units where they didn't belong. The men had stuck together during the Desert Campaign against the Axis forces and had formed an authentic esprit de corps among each other. They were bound by their loyalty to the unit. The mutineers were all members of the Tyne Tees 50th Northumbrian and Highland 51st Divisions, and before the mutiny, they all had clean service records. Around 1,500 of them were separated from their units when the 8th Army moved on to Sicily. They were left behind because they were wounded in combat or had been struck by malaria and were then sent to Africa for treatment and recovery. Still, the soldiers were eager to join their comrades in battle. As they were transported back to Sicily, they were cheerful and ready to cross the Mediterranean. However, midway through the journey, the loyal men learned that they were not heading to Sicily, but to Salerno to support the American 5th Army. The seasoned veterans felt betrayed, and upon arrival, they were sent to a nearby beach to wait for orders. It turned out that the change of plans had been an administrative error, but the army did not back down. When the British were finally ordered to prepare for battle, 191 veterans refused to march, despite being warned that the punishment could be death. The men were eventually court-martialed and found guilty, and the Adjutant General, Sir Ronald Adam, had to intervene to save them from certain death. The mutineers were then sent back to the same units they'd refused to join in Salerno. Then, when the war ended, their hard-earned combat medals were removed, and their war pensions were significantly reduced. Decades later, in the 2000s, a debate took place in the House of Commons to discuss whether the army should issue a pardon for dishonoring the camaraderie of these veterans. However, the Ministry of the Armed Forces has denied these requests. The Royal Indian Navy Mutiny. The Royal Indian Navy Mutiny, or the Naval Uprising of 1946, is regarded as the most significant mutiny in military history. It involved over 20,000 sailors, 80 ships, and 20 bases from the Royal Indian Navy. Poor working conditions, bad food, and false promises of making India an independent country led the Indians to mutiny against the dying grip of the United Kingdom. As soon as World War II started, several Indian mutinies were suppressed by the British government. At least 9 uprisings were reported in the Indian Royal Navy, which fought against the Japanese and the Germans. Then, on February 18, 1946, several Indian pioneers' mutinies exploded in Calcutta, Jabalpur, Berar, and Bombay. The sparks of revolution and independence quickly spread to the point that the Royal Navy and British forces had to intervene. However, they were not successful. Led by signaller M.S. Khan, the Indian Royal Navy quickly gathered sailors and officers alike to protest for better working conditions and an independent India. They also fought for more and better food, improved living conditions, and more basic rights for the Indian population. The Indian sailors then elected a Naval Central Strike Committee, and students, workers, and police unions joined them to rebel against British rule. The Royal Navy and the Air Force eventually threatened to attack the Indian ships if they did not surrender, and a civil war was imminent. The Indian National Congress and the Muslim League both condemned the mutiny, as it posed a significant danger to peaceful independence. Only the Indian Communist Party supported the movement and quickly turned violent. However, the mutiny was dismissed after a meeting between M.S. Khan, Vallabhbhai Patel, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and even Mahatma Gandhi. Shortly after, India became independent through peaceful terms. The Colombia Eagle incident. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. government hired several hundred private vessels to deliver all sorts of war supplies across the Pacific. The SS Columbia was one of them, and carried over 4,500 tons of napalm to Thailand. However, the ship never arrived at its destination. On March 14, 1970, the SS Columbia became the first U.S. ship as far back as the 1800s to mutiny, after 2 anti-war crew members took over command of the vessel as an act of protest against the war in Asia. The Vietnam War received a lot of pushback from the American public before it even began, and as the conflict in Asia raged on, several movements clamoring for peace put pressure on the government. 2 young merchant marines of the SS Columbia, named Clyde Mackay and Alvin Gledkowski, were fervent anti-war believers, and they wanted to change the course of the war. It was February of 1970, and the American withdrawal was already underway. While the ship was en route to Thailand, Mackay and Gledkowski went into the captain's cabin and threatened him and the chief mate with a revolver they had smuggled in. Both men believed that by taking control of the napalm the ship carried, they could force President Richard Nixon to accelerate the withdrawal of U.S. troops. Mackay and Gledkowski ordered the captain to plot a course for Cambodia if he wanted to live. After doing so, the 2 mutineers ordered the whole crew to board the lifeboats. They threatened to detonate a bomb planted on the ship if they refused, and the crew obeyed. When the 2 men told the authorities of the port of Sihanoukville what had happened, they were imprisoned. Unfortunately for the 2 Americans, the pro-American Cambodians had won over the communists during the Civil War. Gledkowski was then transferred to the United States, while Mackay fled from Cambodia with another American soldier and was never heard of again. The Kiel Mutiny. As World War I reached its end, soldiers from every side were exhausted, especially the Germans. In addition, a food shortage and the dire economic situation threatened to ignite a revolution. In October of 1918, Kriegsmarine sailors were informed that the top brass was planning a desperate one-way mission against the Royal Navy. However, the men were unwilling to sacrifice their lives for a war they knew was already lost, and decided to disobey the orders. The crews stationed at Wilmershaven stood their ground, But as the revolt's ringleaders were arrested, an all-out mutiny immediately spread to the city of Kiel. 1 month later, the mutiny ignited the sparks of a revolution. The rebels eventually took control of the city, imitating the Russian revolutionaries, and demanded better rights for soldiers and low-tier workers. The ideas of revolution quickly spread throughout the country, and coupled with the demands of the British, French, and Americans, the German Kaiser finally abdicated. This act led to a violent reprisal to impose order and would then see the rise of the Weimar Republic. Thank you for watching our video. Please like and subscribe to our Dark Documentaries channels to find more exciting historical content. And let us know in the comments below what you think of all these modern mutinies.